Levi Mwanawasa Medical University and Lusaka Business and Technical College. So at this point, I will call upon Levi Mwanawasa Medical University to come up front. A round of applause for them as they come forward. Thus far, Levi has not lost any debate. This tells you something about them. They are well-deserved quarterfinalists. As they are coming, we will also ask Lusaka Business and Technical College to come up front. A round of applause for them as they come forward. LBTC. LBTC, quickly. We do not want to penalize you, even as you are just starting. So quickly come forward. LBTC. Do we have Lusaka Business and Technical College in the house? Yes, please. Please come forward. We've already waited for too long, and you have had quite some time to prepare. So, need to come up front. The motion being discussed states as follows. This House believes Zambia should focus on increasing the number of listed companies rather than increasing trading activity. I will say that again. This House believes Zambia should focus on increasing the number of listed companies rather than increasing trading activity. Levi Mwanawasa Medical University is the government, whereas the Lusaka Business and Technical College are the opposition. If you have not written your names yet, please do write them in the order that you will be speaking from first to last so that we can hand them over to the judges. Also, I do not see timekeepers and those for evidence. We need someone to help with time. Okay. We are now starting. These are the quarterfinals. The same rules apply. And even for this one, you lose and you're out. And the beauty about this one, there will be no special kind of qualification. You win, you proceed, you lose, bye-bye. All right, we begin. Ladies and gentlemen, at this point, let's please welcome the Prime Minister.
Hello? You cannot build a thriving market on a handful of companies. Build the market first, then build the training. It is for this reason that I stand before you to strongly propose to the motion under fundamental scrutiny that states, as I stipulate, beginning of quote, this House believes that Zambia should focus on increasing the number of listed companies rather than increasing the trading activity. But before I carry on my debate, it would be impolite of me to proceed without recognizing the presence of the following people. To the moderator, I salute. To the judges, I say judges fairly and accordingly. Timekeeper, keep the time ticking. Esteemed dignitaries, members of this august House, may I simply say, all diplomatic etiquette is indeed highly observed. Members of this House, before I carry on my debate, we do realize that there are fundamental principles and key words within this motion that needs to be understood, members of the House, isolating the words listed companies and trading activity. According to the Securities and Exchange Commission, members of the House, it defines listed company as a public company in whose shares are traded on a regulated securities or stock exchange and has met all the listing requirements. According to the Securities and Exchange Commission, again, it defines a trade as the act of transaction in securities in the securities exchange. A trade is effected when a buyer and a seller's orders match on a given price. May the good Samaritan please do likewise. Now, members of the House, as the Prime Minister, I have three duties, and that is to introduce the motion to the House, to redefine the motion in its simplest terms, and to give a detailed blueprint as to how we as the government shall flow. Now, members of the House, in redefinition, what are we as the government saying, members of the House? We are in support of the motion, and we are saying that, yes, Zambia should, in fact, give its attention and effort to increase the number of public companies whose shares are traded on a regulated securities and stock exchange, members of the House, rather than increasing the act of transacting in securities in the securities exchange. Yes, there is trading activity that we as the government do not dispute, but the problem is that there are too few companies, members of the House. Zambia's stock market is one of the smallest stock markets, members of the House, in the world, members of the House. The Lusaka Stock Exchange is one of the smallest stock markets, despite having over 1,000 registered companies. According to the Lusaka Securities Exchange, it says that there are 22 companies listed on the LUSE, including 3 banks and 1 MNO. Now, may the good Samaritan please do likewise. Now, members of the House, this just shows that there are too few companies for us to actually invest, members of the House, and for us to emphasize and increase the act of transacting in securities and securities on the securities exchange. Now, members of the House, my second speaker will talk about more listings on the stock exchange will diversify risk and build investor confidence. My third speaker will show how this House that having more listed companies enhances investor trust, prevents market securities, and improves economic growth. My summarizer will not only rebut the invalidities raised by the opposition, but reaffirm our stance as the government and therefore give recommendations. Now, members of the House, we as the government are saying that more listed companies leads to more choices for the Zambian people, for you, members of the House, to have a better option of choosing what speaks to your needs. And with these few points, I rest my case.
Thank you so much. The Prime Minister setting a foundation for the government. I should make mention of this rule before we go forward. Starting now, for interjections, you only begin after the first minute is done. So in the first minute, speakers are immune to any interjections, but after the first minute is done, then you can interject. So we proceed, and ladies and gentlemen, at this point, we now call upon the leader of the opposition.
Ladies and gentlemen, I am here to debate the debate which has already been debated by the best debaters. But before I go any further, allow me to pass my sincere greetings to the following people who made this debate a success. To the judge, I salute you. To the timekeeper, I say keep your eyes on the times, because time always goes forward like our president, he's always forward. Back to the motion which stated, The House believes private-owned companies should receive greater initiative. As the first speaker, allow me to break the bomb of intelligence amongst ourselves. So the first point is private-owned companies. These are businesses owned by the private individuals or investors, not by the government. So members of the House, private companies are important, but they should not be treated better than state-owned enterprises simply because they are private-owned. My second point is initiative. These are awards or benefits used to encourage, not taken,
May the speaker
not
pause?
used.
We'll have to pause the debate for a short while to just address something quick.
ninaphunzira maningi kuli wa Securities and Exchange Commission wamvera na mabanki yambiri yatipuzisa wamvera yonse na ma insurance company vamatipuzisa pali iyinkani wamvera ukabwere chabe tikaphunzire bonse osagongagona vantu pali ma investment wamvera uvesese.
Be alert, spot fraud and scams early enough. Get the facts right about crypto assets before your investment. Ooh, be a smart investor, be your own protector. Participate and learn in the World Investor Week. Be a smart investor, protect your money. Come and learn at the World Investor Week. Wela upunzile, basakugonge. Wela upunzile, come and learn at the World Investor Week. Wela upunzile, basakugonge. Wela upunzile, come and learn at the World Investor Week. We give you tools so you don't lose when you make a move to invest online. It's time to learn how to safely use.
Okay, so we will proceed as follows. The two institutions before us will have to leave the stage. Unfortunately, one of them had prepared for a wrong motion. So we'll give them time to prepare, but they'll be back. This quarterfinal still has to happen. That being the case, the next debate will be between the reigning champions and the National Institute of Public Administration, NIPA. So we'll quickly allow the teams to leave. Emmanuel, can we have a change of placards so that we can have the next debate? Okay, so we will have the University of Zambia and Rockview University. Thank you. But also, let's keep in mind that all of us need to be in the house of debate. Doesn't matter whether you prepared or not, all of you are supposed to be in these premises. And then another thing is, yesterday we left quite a mess, and the owners of the premises were not pleased. So what will happen today is, for lunch, all of you must eat from within here, so that it's easy for us to take care of that trash. And also, the issues of preparation. When you go out there, you're making noise for other rooms that have meetings as well. So that is why all of you will have to be here as long as the debate is proceeding. Thank you. So the University of Zambia and Rockview University to come forward. Rockview, Unza, please come forward. Rockview University. We are out of time, so please come forward. We do not want to deduct any marks, but we'll do that if we have to. Rockview University, I will not call you again. Also, going forward, if an institution is called and you are not in the house, you will immediately be deducted of points. The chief judge will announce how many points, but you will immediately lose marks. So make sure you are in the house. When it's time to debate, you debate. So the motion being discussed states as follows. This House believes privately owned companies should receive greater incentives to list than state-owned enterprises. This House believes privately owned companies should receive greater incentives to list than the state-owned enterprises. Timekeepers, I do not see one timekeeper. I only see one. What institution is that? Rockview, your timekeeper, please. And someone for evidence as well. So in this motion, the University of Zambia is the government and Rockview University are the opposition. I will ask that you give us a list of your names in the order that you'll be speaking so that we can give to the judges. Without further ado, we will begin. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give a round of applause to the Prime Minister.
So my speech begins now. Honorable adjudicators and indeed distinguished members of the House, might I simply say, the protocol is highly and highly observed. Panel, the private sector in Zambia is the leading sector in our economy. It spearheads innovation, employment, and contribution to GDP. Now, while we do not neglect the fact that state-owned entities are very significant to our economy, we have to address the underlying challenges that affect private investment in our country. It's for this reason that we as a government propose a motion which states, and I quote, "This House believes that privately owned companies should receive greater incentives to lease than state-owned enterprises." End of quotation. Now, as Prime Minister, I'll define key terms in this motion. So I'll read the key terms to be as precise and concise as possible. Panel, privately owned companies. Investmentopia describes, state-owned entities. Investmentopia describes state-owned entities as a state-owned entity is a legal entity created by a government to engage in commercial activities. These include companies such as Zesco, Zamtel, and so on. Next definition. Private-owned entities. Private-owned entities. Investotopia describes private-owned companies as a business or entity where ownership is held by limited number of shareholders and it is not available for public trading or listing. Incentive. Panel. Incentive is a reason or motivation to encourage parties to engage in a certain product and activity. Panel. Today we are saying both entities have incentives, but who should we give more incentives to? And I think that's what we have to understand in today's debate. Panel. When we look at the challenges that private entities face as compared to government entities, I'll list 3 for you in today's debate. First of all, there's registration fees. Panel, government entities have the luxury of having the government at their disposal. What does this mean? This means that they have more access to capital. The second entity that we have is, the problem that they have is bureaucratic procedures. Panel, picture this. The government itself owns these entities. So when it comes to listing, definitely they can beat those bureaucratic procedures as opposed to private entities. As opposed to private entities which have to face bureaucratic procedures. And our final speaker will come and highlight that clearly. The third thing is lack of proper financing. Panel, a study was done and it showed that most Zambian entities cannot afford legal and accounting services. Now, these are requirements for you to list on the stock market. You have to meet certain legal obligations and you have to meet certain financial obligations in regards to accounting. Now, panel, we are suggesting that the government should reduce the cost or in fact create an industry where these entities can get free accounting and legal advice. That's the word we want to present today. I will now engage you in your POI.
Now, through you, Mr. Speaker, you said that the state-owned enterprises are the ones that are only allowed to incentives. But the evidence that I have here today from ZNBC says Mr. Hapwala cites a 5-year custom duty exemption on machinery and equipment for the development of multi-facility economic zones as one of the incentives available to both local and foreign investors. May this piece of evidence be passed to the Board of Budget.
Thank you very much. And like I highlighted earlier, both parties receive incentives. Our discussion today is whether who receives more incentives. And to highlight that, you have listed a state-owned company that is receiving these incentives. And with that regard, it means the private sector is being left behind. What we want is to even the playing field. Panel, picture this. You have 2 children. Both of them are of the same age and they're in the same class and receive the same resources, but one is lacking behind. Isn't it only reasonable for the parent to take the child who's lacking behind for tuitions? Panel, today, we are simply saying it's equity over equality. That's why we as a government propose this motion. With this, we've never been more proud to propose. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, the quarterfinals have begun. The University of Zambia going up against Rockview University. UNZA as the government, Rockview as the opposition. The government has stated their foundation, where they're coming from and where they're going. Ladies and gentlemen, let's listen to what the opposition has to say in response. Let's please welcome the leader of the opposition.
Timekeeper, my time starts now. It's such an honor being in such a house occupied by intellectuals under the canopy that governs us in such a manner. Therefore, all protocol be highly observed. Members of the House, we are gathered here under the motion which states as I quote, beginning of quotation. This House believes that privately owned companies should receive greater insensitive to list than state-owned enterprise. End of quotation. Members of the House, allow me to break down some of the key words in this motion, starting with private. According to the Oxford Book New 9th edition, may the Good Samaritan do as wise, on page 122, it states, as I quote, private means belonging to or for the use of a particular person or group, not for public use. Owned. According to page 1103 of the Oxford presented to the judges, page 1103 states, a word used to emphasize that something belongs to or is connected with somebody. Company. According to the same Oxford, which is presented to the judges, according to page 305, it states, a business organization that makes money by producing or selling goods or services. Greater. On the same Oxford, which is presented to you on page 685, it states something which is bigger and less than and which is bigger and more than the average size. Insensitive. According to the same Oxford, which is presented to you, page 794, it states something that drives to do something. To list. According to the understanding of the motion, to list simply means coming on board and also presenting shares that can be bought or sold by others, which brings income and also a source of profit. When we talk of state-owned, we are simply talking about something or government. Sorry, we are simply talking about something that is owned by the government. When we talk of enterprise, it's simply a company or a business. Now, allow me to break the ice. Members of the House, you bear witness with me to say, when you look on the motion of today, it is simply stating that the government should give more help to private companies than to government already owned companies. Why? Because they're selling. When they begin to sell their shares to these listed companies, they will be improving them at a capacity where it will bring more injury on the government. Why? Because government-owned companies, these are the same companies that are prioritized by the citizens, and it also gives them an advantage. Why? Because they are protected. Members of the House, allow me to explain the motion for the House to understand it in these ways. When you talk of great intensive, not allowed. When you talk of number one, privately owned companies, these are business owned by private individuals, families of private investors rather than the government. Already from there, if they are not owned by the government, what does it mean? A family can have a business which is run by themselves, but what guarantee do we have to say workers at that company will be protected? At what rate are they going to be protected, and what happens if their contracts are being terminated? We have seen a lot of workers crying after a contract. Why? Because there is no guarantee to say they are protected. When we talk of government-owned companies, there is insurance of allowed.
Thank you very much. Just to seek clarity, to start with, you say the government entities are covered, so that means they already have an advantage. Why do you want to continue adding advantage when there is a team that is not advantaged? You therefore go further to say, what about when there's contract termination? What does contract termination have to do with offering incentives?
Ladies and gentlemen, the motion states the privately owned company should receive greater. The word there is greater. We are simply talking about equality. The government has nothing to do with who is owned, which company is owned by who, and where it comes from. They have to look at all companies equally. Why? Because each and every company is accommodated by the people of the nation, the citizens of the nation. It doesn't matter which company you work to, provided you found a source of living. We are not saying that these private companies, they don't give. Yes, quite right, they give us job opportunities, but at what cost do these job opportunities come about? When we build our own companies via the government, you say here the government. I ask for 30 seconds, please. Thank you. When we talk of this, they are the government, but they are failing to understand the state of what they do as a government. Government have got companies, and each and every worker is insured. We all know about NAPSA, to the point where as you are working, you are earning, and you are protected. There's the right of a citizen being protected. Now, privately owned companies, there is no protection to say even if you are done, you'll be guaranteed or you'll be given a pension. Thank you. I rest my case.
Okay, thank you so much. That was the leader of the opposition laying a foundation on behalf of the opposition. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the first quarterfinal and it's between the University of Zambia and Rockview University. At this point, we continue with the debate, and I call upon the Deputy Prime Minister to make his submission.
Testing 1, 2. My speech will begin in 3, 2, 1. Thank you, Mr. Moderator, for your call. And indeed, shall I simply say, all diplomatic courtesy is highly and sincerely observed. Now, panel, the motion under discussion this afternoon is calling us to create a comparative. We are asking ourselves, between the private sector and state-owned enterprises, who between the two deserves to get greater incentives to list on the Securities Exchange? Now, before I proceed, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to address a misconception raised by the leader of opposition. Ladies and gentlemen, he stated to this House that the key word in this debate is the word greater, and then proceeded to say that this word signifies equality. Ladies and gentlemen, that defies logic. Greater does not... Point of order, it's not yet the first minute, please. Okay. Allow me to proceed. Panel, they stated that the key word in this debate is the word greater, and they stated that their stance is a stance of equality. But the word greater in itself does not signify any form of equality. Now allow me to proceed, ladies and gentlemen. Please, allow it.
Now, through you, Mr. Speaker, the current speaker seems he was disturbed because he didn't understand what I was talking about, because he himself failed to understand the motion. I said greater means something that is bigger than the other at an average spec. And we said if these privately owned companies receive greater, what does it mean to the government owned? I said the government shouldn't look at who works for which company or which company belongs to which company. There should be equality. Can you kindly be specific when you are... Thank you.
Okay. Fine. Ladies and gentlemen, I beg to move by stating the following. The current speaker has agreed with what we are saying, except that the logic is a little bit defied, and I will address his concern in the procession of my speech by stating this, ladies and gentlemen. Number one, ladies and gentlemen, why do we want companies to list on Securities Exchange? We want that companies list on Securities Exchange so that they can access capital. Therefore, ladies and gentlemen, it becomes logical to us to understand as the government that the majority are able to list on this Securities Exchange. But ladies and gentlemen, this is what we want to point to you. The following are the number of state-owned entities that are owned in Zambia. According to a research that was done by the World Bank, ladies and gentlemen, they stated, quote, the SOE portfolio, SOE meaning state-owned enterprises, is 48 SOEs in the country. Good Samaritan, please do as wise. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to quote to you how many private entities we have in Zambia. There are 9,163 privately owned entities that were listed in the first part of this year alone by Park Russia, the Good Samaritan. Please do as wise. Now, panel, let us draw a comparison between these two things. Firstly, we're asking ourselves, between 48 companies and 9,163 people, who between these two should we prioritize? Who between these two should receive the greater incentive? We as the government strongly believe that the majority should receive the stronger incentive. Now, moving on, ladies and gentlemen, allowed before I move on.
Now, through you, Mr. Speaker, you're speaking of the majority. The majority are the state-owned enterprises. Why are the majority the state-owned enterprises? Majority the state-owned enterprises is because the people have access to national assets, and the majority of the people are the ones that are not very rich, and therefore they are still given the opportunity to get some shares from those same what? Yes, thank you.
Panel, allow me to correct the misconception that has been brought to this House. Their argument is saying to this House that there are more people in the public. However, you, the public, are not a state-owned entity. Companies such as Zesco, companies such as Zamtel, these are state-owned companies, and they are 48. Ladies and gentlemen, I beg to move. Now, panel, we also need to understand that another advantage that these private entities introduce to us as to the stock market and the Securities Exchange in Zambia in total is that the government entities are very prone to corruption. Ladies and gentlemen, the Journal of Corporate Government Research stated that in addition, the board membership is given based off a specific government position rather than merit-based, which compromises board effectiveness. Good Samaritan, please do as well. Now, panel, what this is trying to tell us is if we prioritized state-owned entities compared to private entities, rather if we gave greater incentives to the state-owned entities compared to the private entities, what we're doing is we're giving greater incentives to people that are prone to corruption. We're giving greater incentives to people whose boards are prone to being influenced by politics, to people whose influence, point of order, you've had.
Your time is up.
20 seconds.
20 seconds it is.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to bring this to bed. If you have a child in a classroom, are you going to give an award to a child because they're the teacher's child or because they perform better? Panel, we beg to lead this house to say, let us reward the one that performs better than the teacher's child.
time
I
is
rest
up.
my case. Good Samaritan.
A round of applause, ladies and gentlemen, for the Deputy Prime Minister. The quarterfinal is getting heated. Just a couple of concerns before we go forward. Number one, point of order and point of information or interjection are not the same thing. Point of order is only raised when something against the rules of the debate has been done, or something that disrupts the debate competition, okay? That is when you raise a point of order. But point of information, that's the normal thing that you've been doing. So please, that difference is very important, because if you raise a point of order and then you give a point of information instead, that would be wrong, okay? And that interjection would not be accounted for. The second thing is, ladies and gentlemen, you don't need to count down as you begin your speech. Immediately you start speaking, your time will start. So just start your submission. We've seen it with quite a number of debaters. So for purposes of going forward, don't do a countdown, just begin your speech, okay? So we now hand it over to the opposition by calling upon the Deputy Opposition Leader.
Grade A civic education. Democracy is the rule of the people, by the people, for the people. Characteristics of democracy: transparency, accountability, inclusiveness. Inclusiveness is one of the characteristics of the government, and now the government is failing to include its own people in the state-owned enterprise and private equity. Ladies and gentlemen, before I further conclude this argument, allow me to say all diplomat etiquette highly observed. Now, before I continue, allow me to rebut to some of the misconceptions made by the government. They were basically just from saying, they were talking about something that has to relate with corruption. So basically what they were saying to you, my esteemed judges, they were saying that the Luce and the SEC, they are corrupt. Ladies and gentlemen, members of this august house, just because AIDS is there doesn't mean I have hate. It is there, yes, but it doesn't mean that I have. Just because corruption is there doesn't mean that all the state-owned enterprise are corrupt. Beginning with my first point that states state-owned enterprise improve transparency and accountability. When we even the ground, ladies and gentlemen, when we even the ground, it means that we are going to force the government institutions and the bodies of the government to be transparent. Let us look at the current regulations of the SEC. The SEC made a Good Samaritan do as wise. The current regulation of the SEC and the LUCE, they require a company to be transparent with the information that they serve. So what am I trying to say? When we even the ground, not only allowing private owned, allowed.
Honorable member, I would like to raise this to your attention. Private entities can still be owned by Zambians. This motion is not saying foreign entities, but private entities. Therefore, if we prioritize these private entities, we're still getting rule of people, for the people, by the people. Please do not mislead the House. These state-owned entities are those that are officially owned by the government of the Republic of Zambia. I submit.
This state-owned enterprise protects the public interest of the people. These state enterprises are enterprises that develop and service the country. We are talking of ZESCO. We are talking of health facilities. We are talking of Zamtel. These are state-owned enterprise. Allow me to continue. So I am saying state-owned enterprise improve transparency and accountability, meaning when we allow the state-owned enterprise to also have greater incentive rather than the private, it means that we are going to force them to deliberately, naturally be transparent. Moving on to my second point. The second point, not allowed. The second point is public value beyond profit. Public value beyond profit. These are our things, ladies and gentlemen, members of this August House. State-owned enterprise are companies or enterprises that we can look at and say, five years from now, we can point to our grandchildren I beg your pardon, 10 years or 20 years from now, we can point at the state-owned enterprise of our children and we can tell them that is our company, Zambian-made company. And how is that going to be possible? That is going to be possible if we even the ground. So if this motion passed, my esteemed judges, that means that we are not going to have the future of Zambia, hope and the pride of Zambia. I continue, not allowed. Moving on to
May the speaker pause. Interjection allowed.
Panel, the current speaker tells the House that state-owned entities will be more profitable. Are you aware that majority of state-owned entities run at a loss? Zesco runs at a loss. Zamtel runs at a loss. So how sure are you that when they list on the market, investors are going to have confidence in them? I digress. Thank you.
Them running on loss is one of the reasons why they should even be listed on the Lusaka Stock Exchange, because it is going to provide funding to them, ladies and gentlemen. We are talking about Zambia, one Zambia, one nation. Moving on to my fellow points, may this piece of evidence be passed on to the judges. Moving on to my third point. Private companies already have natural motivation to list. The main reason companies list shares publicly is to raise capital, increase their market value, and expand their operation. Private companies already gain direct financial benefits. As my speaker earlier interjected me, he said private companies make a lot of money. True, they make a lot of money, meaning they already have financial capability. So why should we give them an unfair advantage over the other? Ladies and gentlemen, with these but few convincing points, allow me to say I rest my case.
Ladies and gentlemen, the quarter-final. A round of applause for the Deputy Opposition Leader. When I grow up, I want to be like him, so that you can clap for me like that as well. All right, we continue with the debate. Ladies and gentlemen, let's please welcome the Member of Government.
Now, the motion states, this House believes privately owned companies should receive greater incentives to list than state-owned enterprises. What this means to the very core is that both the state-owned enterprises are going to receive incentives. Even the private sector is also going to receive incentives. So we're not arguing that the state-owned enterprises are not going to receive incentives. With that being said, before I go on, allow me to simply recognize the important dignitaries in the House of Debate. The Speaker, the judges, may I simply say, all protocols be highly observed. Now, to engage in just a few rebuttals. Panel, the opposition came to this House, the leader of opposition came to this House and argued about equality. But panel, can we really have equality if one of them is greater? And what really is more important, equality or equity? Let us remember that equality is simply, I get to, they also get to. Equity requires that we see who is at a disadvantage, and after we see who's at a disadvantage, we level the playing field. That is what the proposing delegation is arguing for, panel. Furthermore, the deputy leader, not yet, I'll engage you. The deputy leader of opposition came to this House and argued inclusiveness of the people in state-owned enterprises. Now, a question to ask is this. You and I, are we part of these state-owned enterprises? The simple answer is no, we are not. So even when the state-owned enterprises are on, not yet, I'll engage you. So even when the state-owned enterprises are on the market, it does not directly translate to you and I benefiting. Yes?
All right. It's funny how you came out saying, asking the audience and yourself if you are part of this and why are you debating for this. You know about this. Let's talk about this. The government, the private state-owned, the private state incentives, they are made up of the people in this country. You understand? Just because it is a privately owned, it doesn't mean to say it doesn't have an inclusive of the people. We are talking about a state where if the people are involved, are they protected? The government-owned companies, they are protected. No, we're talking of pension. Even yourself, you are looking forward to being in a company that will be protected. At the end of the day, you have benefits. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, let us also remember this. Even the people who are working in the private sector also contribute to pension. Pension funds do not exclusively exist for the people who are working in state-owned enterprises. Just because I work for Zambif does not mean I do not qualify for a pension. I digress. The deputy leader of opposition also argued that the state-owned enterprises running on a loss is actually the reason they should be on the market. Let us remember one of the requirements of being listed in the first place. It is that you have to be profitable for you to be on the market. Panel, what then does the proposition bring to you? We are simply saying private companies need it more than the state-owned enterprises. To begin with, imagine two students, one who is supported by maybe let's say a manager from the Bank of Zambia as well as Konkola Copper Mine. And this represents the government. And you have another student, on the other hand, who is self-sponsored, representing the privately owned companies. Panel, if a scholarship came on board, are you really going to say the one who already has sponsorship should take president? If you are saying, yes, they should, you're arguing with the opposition. Now, if you say the one who is on self-sponsorship should get this particular scholarship because they need it more, you are agreeing with the government. That is the reality right now. Who needs more incentives? We are not arguing that state-owned enterprises do not need incentives. Yes, they do, but who really needs them more? That is what we're here to understand. I will give you, allowed.
Now, through you, Mr. Speaker, you're saying that the private sector is the one that needs it more. But let's look at the fact that the state-owned enterprises, from the evidence that I'm holding in my hand right now, it's a speech issued by the president, Hichile Mahakainde, who said that he reduced domestic market from 24 billion in 2022 to 16 billion. And knowing fully well that Zambia is involved in, may this piece of evidence be passed, is involved in the private market sector. And how are we going to be getting?
Unfortunately, that interjection was not complete. So how to engage it is a bit difficult. But even though, I would still try to engage it. Panel, we need to remember, even in the same quotation that has been given, they are mentioning that the private sector. Why do we keep on mentioning the private sector and then saying the state-owned enterprises are the ones who need it more? If yet again and again you keep on going to the private sector. And let us remember this, panel. Privately owned companies does not mean foreign companies. It simply means companies that are not being owned by the government. So you and I are basically the owners of these privately owned companies. Now, panel, what do privately owned companies have to go through for them to list on the market? It is very expensive. To start with, for you to prepare an initial public offering, an IPO, it requires a lot of capital even before you list on the market. Statutory instrument number 25 of 2024 requires the following. Number one, a prospectus examination, which means you submit a document to SEC for them to analyze your company. Panel, 30 seconds to summarize.
20 seconds.
Panel, you are going to spend 44,444 kwacha just for them to review your document, and to spend 66,000 for you to now list your shares. Panel, you're spending 110,000 even before you reach the market. Panel, the privately owned sector is suffering more, and therefore they deserve more incentives. I submit.
A round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. What a spirited submission. This debate is quite intense. For those of you joining us online, this isn't the final, it's actually the quarterfinal. Both teams trying to go as far as the final. We'll find out which one of those teams it will be. Ladies and gentlemen, let's now hand it over to the opposition by allowing the opposition member.
Riding on the protocols that have already been observed by my fellow colleagues, I say to all members, to the judges, Mr. Speaker, and to everyone in this house, I suggest may all protocols be highly observed. Now, before I go any further, I want to speak about something factual. We are busy saying that the state-owned enterprises are backed by the government, but we are lacking behind. Members of the House, bear me witness that there was an amending act or an act that was published
This act was a state-owned enterprise bill that was published in Parliament, and it was enacted as an act which stated to say state-owned enterprises now will be accountable for their own financial accountability. What do they trying to say? They're trying to say that state-owned enterprises are now on the level of being able financially stable on their own rather than standing on back of the government. May this piece of evidence be passed to the judges. Members of the House, without being spoken, now I want you to understand that things are moving, things are changing. The state-owned enterprises are no longer relying on the government, but they are standing on their own posture. They are standing on their own capabilities and accountabilities. Moving on to the second point. As a developing country, let us operate under a going concern initiative. What do they mean when they say a going concern initiative? We're trying to say, let us think through the future. Let us understand where we're going. Members of the House, bear me witness that the most private sectors in this country are multinational companies. Allowed.
Mr. Speaker, we agree with you. You've told us that state-owned companies are able to run their own finances, but private entities are the ones that are in need of it more. So please, correct the House. Why do you then think that these people that can run for themselves should be prioritized over those that cannot?
Now, members of the House, if you heard me clearly, even the private sector runs on themselves, don't they? So even though although the state-owned enterprises begin to run on themselves, what happens is that they begin to move in the same aspect as the private enterprises, because they all live on the same. What the government is trying to do is to bring about accountability, equity, and equality, because we don't want people at the end of the day saying to say, oh, this company is being pushed by the government, but we want our own state-owned enterprises grow without government pushing them forward. That was my point. That was the clarification. Moving on, members of the House, as a developing country, we need to be moving under a going concern initiative. What I'm trying to say, members of the House, is if we are moving under a going concern, we don't want to be increasing incentives on private sectors that will lead us to initiatives of where now we have examples of the Invest Trust Bank. We all know that it collapsed and it was declared liquidated. Members of the House, it went bankrupt and insolvency, members of the House. And now it was declared redundancy. The same people employed in that investment bank began to say they wanted a package from the government. Members of the House, how do they need a package from the government when it is privately owned? That's the reason why let us increase the state-owned enterprises, so that even when there's a redundancy or a bankruptcy or insolvency, government comes through and helps their people. That's what we're talking about. Members of the House, moving on, the proposition spoke about aloud.
Now, the honorable member brings to the House that Invest Trust collapsed, and after it collapsed, people went to the government. Now, do you not think that a government which is capable of handling itself does not need as much incentives as Invest Trust? Imagine if Invest Trust was on the market and it had received the capital. Would it have collapsed to begin with?
Now, members of the House, if you heard me clearly, that's the reason why we have what we call loans. We have digital loans, members of the House, and the government issues out bonds. It sells bonds. So every company has got the ability to lend and to bring in initiatives. Members of the House, the reason why these private institutions begin to collapse is because they don't have the accountability and the capability to run their own institutions. There's what we call internal control systems. Even if you give people money, if they cannot control themselves internally, they'll fall. That's a fact. Even if we give you money, if you cannot utilize that money and multiply it, at the end of the day, you become broke. Members of the House, let me move on. Moving on to my point, the proposition spoke about having 9,163 private companies. Members of the House, bear me witness that a lot of private companies here are multinational companies. Talk about companies that are charting on the Lusaka Stock Exchange. We have Airtel. It's Airtel from Zambia. A lot of these companies are foreign.
Time is up.
I request for 20 seconds.
20 seconds.
Members of the House, the truth at hand is that a lot of private sectors are foreign companies. Why should we keep investing in companies that get our money and take back to their countries, invest more in their countries, and they keep deriving us of our capital? Let the state-owned enterprises grow. Let them increase so that the capital remains in the nation. I raise my case. This is so-called registered marketing genius, Chiluba Jr. Thank you.
To the speakers, to the debaters, when you're told your time is up, please stop your speech. You risk losing marks just because you didn't follow a simple instruction. Okay, you may think it's clever to keep talking before I reach where you are, but you might just lose marks. So when you're told time up, please consider that. We continue with the debate, and to end the submissions of the government, ladies and gentlemen, the whip of the government.
Mr. Hello? Hello? To you, Mr. Speaker, or protocol be highly observed. Now, panel, you need to understand something about the stock market. When a company or entity decides to go on the stock market, it is expensive. Be it a private company or a state-owned company. But then, panel, you see a situation in which the playing field is not leveled, and that is what we as side government want to do. We have a private company and a state-owned company. We tell you to say that through the private companies, they are the majority in the country, so they deserve greater incentives. We are not against the idea that both of them have incentives. They do have. However, the question in today's debate is who deserves the greater incentives? And we think, panel, it is only ideal that the one that contributes the most to the Zambian people receive these incentives. Panel, what does this motion mean in status quo? Allow me to give an example. You've got Company A, which is a private company, and Company B, which is a state-owned company. If there's a listing requirement that says to say you need to pay 500,000 kwacha, the private company will not be able to list because it does not have the backing that the state-owned company requires. If a state-owned company does not have the 500,000 kwacha, do you know what it can do? It can rely on things as loans, bonds, in order for it to go on the capital market. So in today's debate, we say, let's level the playing field. Now, panel, let me engage with side opposition. Firstly, panel, they talk about inclusion, but you need to understand something. The argument is to say that with state-owned companies comes inclusion because they cater for majority of the people. But you need to understand the nature of these state-owned companies, panel. You need to understand that they are not transparent. You need to understand that there's financial illicit money that goes in there. You need to understand that there's a lot of corruption. So how do you expect, panel, the people who are supposed to care for you are the people who steal for you? How then do you say there's an inclusion if the people who are supposed to safeguard you are the same people who steal from you constantly? And panel, you need to understand that currently investors shun away from investing in our state-owned companies. Why? Because of the same issue of corruption. So the argument to say that inclusion is found with the state-owned companies, panel, it is not justifiable. For it to be inclusive, it needs to cater for you. Panel, there is an argument to say that private companies do not service you, but only state-owned companies. Now I disagree. Allow me to give you of two very good private companies that have been able to help a lot of Zambian people. Talk about companies like Zambif. Panel, Zambif has existed for over a long period of time. How many people in Zambia benefit from Zambif? Your local meals in your fridge, when you open it, it is Zambif, panel. Aside from that, how many employees do we see that Zambif is able to employ? It is able to employ over 6,500 employees. That is one company. Panel, understand something. The majority of the companies that we have in Zambia are private owned. So who do you think creates more jobs for the average Zambian person? Panel, it is the private companies that are able to do this. We've already given you a ratio to say that state-owned companies to private companies. State-owned companies are only 48 out of the over 9,000 private companies that we have. So where do you think the jobs come from? How do you think the average Zambian person is able to survive? Understand the nature also of the jobs that are found in these particular places. You're talking about formal employment. You're also talking about informal employment. That is what inclusion looks like. Remember, they work in companies where there are things such as transparency, accountability, and then panel.
their third speaker talks about that he raised the code to say that the government said there should be financial accountability for state-owned companies. Now, panel, we need to understand the definition of financial accountability. Financial accountability is not funding. No, financial accountability is a situation where you, as a company, explain to us clearly where the money went. And I do believe as to why the president said there should be financial accountability in the state-owned companies. Like I said earlier, it is because they lack auditing. There is corruption. So the advisement to say that state-owned companies should have financial accountability is a good one. And that is what you need. Before they think of saying, let's give greater incentives to the state-owned companies, panel, let there first be financial accountability. Let them first work on the challenges that they face. You need to understand currently the markets or the companies that work best. There is a private company that has proven to be more efficient, unlike the state-owned company. Panel, you need to understand what these private companies also do for we the people of Zambia. Talk about diversification in economy. Currently in Zambia, you seem to find a situation where we highly depend on things such as mining and electricity. But then, panel, it has become a saturated market, and the president or the government are always calling for diversification. This is what the private owned 20 seconds to sum up.
20 seconds it is.
Thank you. This is what the private owned companies come for. So what do we first recommend, panel? Let us promote equity and not equality. Let us level the playing field. I rest my case.
Ladies and gentlemen, the whip of the government, a round of applause. This debate was quite enjoyable. I'm sure panel will have quite a time in terms of tabulating the results. Ladies and gentlemen, let's please welcome the whip of the opposition.
Now, funny how one can go about saying that corruption only exists in the state-owned enterprises, but we all know that by virtue of one being alive, they're bound to be a criminal. That's law 101. Members of this auditorium, now as that to be known as an introduction, may I simply say, all diplomatic etiquettes are indeed observed in the order and manner of seniority. Members of this auditorium, being the summarizer, it is my duty and mandate to sum up the debate and to rebut some of the false accusations that were raised by the side proposing. As members of this auditorium, we very much know that us being the state-owned enterprise, we are the government. We are the ones that were saying that we're trying to level the field. They are saying that they should be given the greater incentives. We, on the other hand, were trying to say that can always be both. We can always level the playing field. Do not be deceived. Members of this auditorium, to my rebuttal, they spoke of corruption and transparency, but the evidence that I have in my hand, it states, and I quote, while the ZDA established in 2006, it has been revamped under the current administration, and thus it's still developing systems and processes and determining how to effectively cooperate with other government agencies and to rely full to mandate. May this piece of evidence be passed. Members of this auditorium, that evidence is proof to say that the corruption that was then in practice, we're trying to talk about something that is relevant, and that is an evidence for the 2025 that is saying that there has been an improvement, and the regulation, the SEC themselves said that the strengthening regulation protection affected to the minority stakeholders is in line with the Companies Act of 2007. May this piece of evidence be passed to the Board of Adjudicators. That evidence that has been passed, members of this auditorium, is proof to say that the corruption is been present everywhere. However, the people that are in power are working very hard in order to make sure that that corruption is eliminated. And for transparency, members of this auditorium, we have what we call as the Public Disclosure Act of 2025. The Public Disclosure Act of 2025 has been put in place to make sure that the people always try the level best as to give out the information to the people. Members of this auditorium, now to the points that have been raised by the opposing side. Some of the points: state-owned enterprise listings, improve transparency and accountability. Members of this auditorium, you indeed concur with me that by virtue of them being state-owned enterprises, they people that are involved in it have the right to know what is going on with their shares, with their monies, and that is why the transparency and accountability is in play. Are the private sector really ready to be part of such an incentive? Members of this auditorium, may this piece of evidence be passed to the members, to the Board of Educators. Wait, it also says that in as much as growth is being present from the private sector, the government is the one that the state-owned enterprises are the ones that are producing the most, with the evidence that states that audited financial statements from 2022 reported 38 SOEs held total assets worth $1.9 billion with a net annual income of 13.2 million. In 2022, it continues. World Bank estimated that Zambia's SOEs employed about 13,000 in total. Members of this auditorium, may this piece of evidence be passed to the Board of Adjudicators. That is proof itself to show that the economic growth is not only reliant or dependent on the private sector. They talked about something that has to do with the capital, the market or the competition has to be given to the one that the capital is more accessible. Us being that we're the large companies that are present, and many of the people that are present and taking part in this growth and development status of our country, it simply just shows that we have the capacity and the abilities. Members of this auditorium, may this piece of evidence be passed to the Board of Adjudicators that was talking about transparency and regulatory systems in line with the other evidence that has been passed. Members of this auditorium, they also said that the majority should come first and the minority, estimating that we are the minority. However, the evidence that I have in hand is saying that the state-owned enterprises, and I quote, Zambia has 48 state-owned enterprises operating in the food agriculture value chain, construction, education, energy, financial services, manufacturing, health, mining, ICT, tourism, supply and chain, and multiple other ones have to be Zambia Electricity Supply Coordination, Zambia Consolidated Copper Mines, and etc., etc. That is proof that we are the majority, and the people that are participating determine the development of the country. We are not here trying to...
Time is up.
I asked for 20 seconds.
20
May this
seconds.
piece of evidence be passed to the Board of Adjudicators. And members of this auditorium, simply saying that the private have created more job opportunities is simply undermining the evidence that has been presented. And I say, when the best is away, the second becomes the best. And we are the second, and we are always the best. I submit.
Achani, your attention, please. Thank you. Achani agakala stagat. No, it's okay. Ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause for the honorable member. To both teams, this was an exciting and thrilling quarterfinal. Congratulations to you both. Unfortunately for one of you, the trip ends here. We'll find out who that is soon enough. You can shake hands as you leave the stage. A round of applause for both teams. You know, these handshakes and smiles that are being shared, I hope they are genuine. Okay, may I have your attention, please? May I have your attention, please? Thank you. So the next, let's be together. Thank you. So the next debate will be between Evelyn Horn College and the National Institute of Public Administration. I hope both teams are in the house. If not, the one that's not in the house will receive a deduction of points. So allow the judges to compile as the placards are being changed, and then the debate will start. Okay, so what will instead happen is we'll break. Let's be together. We'll break for lunch for 30 minutes. It's 14 hours on the dot, so 14:30 we will begin. Evelyn